The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and regret. A sterile cage where Caleb Wright lay motionless, his legs betraying him at 17. His father's fist had done more than bruise his face that night. It had severed his spine, his future, his family. Now, a decade later, Caleb's heart raced as he stared at the letter in his trembling hands. The words, "I'm sorry," scrawled in his father's jagged script. Caleb's life in Burlington, Vermont, hadn't always been a battle. Growing up, he was the kid with the infectious laugh, sketching cityscapes in his notebook and dreaming of architecture school. His mother, Elise, a librarian with a penchant for poetry, nurtured his creativity, while his father, Marcus, a construction foreman, taught him to measure twice, cut once. But when Caleb came out at 16, the warmth in his father's eyes turned to ice. Marcus's traditional values, rooted in a rigid upbringing, couldn't bend. The night Caleb confessed his truth, Marcus's rage exploded, leaving Caleb broken on the living room floor, his mother's screams echoing as she called 911. 10 years later, Caleb, now 27, had rebuilt a life from the wreckage. He lived in a small, sunlit apartment overlooking Lake Champlain, his walls adorned with blueprints and sketches. His wheelchair didn't define him. It was merely a tool, like the pencils he used to draft designs for accessible buildings. His days were filled with purpose, working as a freelance architect, advocating for disability rights, and finding solace in the quiet moments with his best friend, Amara, a fiery trans woman who ran a local coffee shop called Brewed Awakening. But the past wasn't done with him. The letter arrived on a crisp October morning, delivered by a courier who didn't linger. Caleb's fingers traced the envelope's edges, his heart a war drum. Marcus was dying, lung cancer, stage 4. The letter begged for a meeting, a chance to make amends. Caleb wanted to burn it, to let the ashes scatter in the wind. Yet something held him back, a flicker of the boy who once idolized his father. Across town, in a cozy diner bathed in neon light, Caleb met Jalen Carter, a 28-year-old nurse with a quick wit and a smile that could thaw winter. Jalen, who'd grown up in Atlanta before moving north, had a warmth that drew people in, his deep brown eyes holding stories of resilience. They'd met at Amara's coffee shop, where Jalen's habit of sketching on napkins caught Caleb's eye. Their first conversation, about art and dreams, stretched into hours, and soon, their lives intertwined. Late-night talks, shared playlists, and stolen glances that promised more. "Caleb, you don't owe him anything," Jalen said that evening, his voice soft but firm as they sat by the lake, the water reflecting the fading sun. "He hurt you. He doesn't get to decide when forgiveness happens." Caleb gripped the letter, his knuckles paling. "I know, but what if I need this? What if I need to hear him say it wasn't my fault?" Jalen's hand found his, steady and warm. "Then we'll face it together. But you're enough, Caleb. You always were." The decision gnawed at Caleb through sleepless nights. Marcus's violence had stolen his ability to walk, but it hadn't taken his spirit. Yet the idea of seeing his father again felt like stepping into a storm. Amara, ever the voice of reason, urged caution. "You've built a life, Cal. Don't let him tear it down again." But Caleb's heart, stubborn and scarred, craved closure. He agreed to meet Marcus at a hospice in Montpelier, a 40-minute drive from Burlington. Jalen insisted on coming, his presence a lifeline. As they drove through Vermont's rolling hills, ablaze with autumn's fire, Caleb's mind churned with memories. His father's laughter during fishing trips, the way Marcus's hands, calloused from work, once lifted him onto his shoulders. Those moments felt like another life. The hospice was a quiet place, its halls lined with soft blues and faded photographs. Marcus lay in a bed by a window, his once robust frame withered, his gray hair thin. His eyes, still sharp, locked onto Caleb's as he wheeled into the room. Jalen stood behind, a silent sentinel. "Caleb," Marcus rasped, his voice a ghost of its former strength. "I didn't think you'd come." Caleb's throat tightened. "I almost didn't." The air was heavy with unspoken words. Marcus's gaze flickered to Jalen, then back to Caleb. "I was wrong," he said, each word a struggle. "I let fear and anger ruin us. I'm sorry." Caleb wanted to scream, to demand why love had been a crime worth breaking him for. Instead, he sat still, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. "You left me paralyzed, Dad. You left me." Marcus's eyes welled with tears, a sight Caleb had never seen. "I know, and I've carried that every day." Jalen's hand rested on Caleb's shoulder, grounding him. The room felt smaller, the weight of 10 years pressing down. Caleb wanted to believe his father's remorse, but trust was a fragile thing, shattered long ago. As Marcus spoke of his regrets, Caleb's mind wandered to the life he'd built. His art, his friends, Jalen. Could he forgive a man who'd nearly destroyed him? The visit ended with no promises, only a tentative agreement to talk again. As Caleb and Jalen drove back to Burlington, the silence was heavy but not empty. Jalen reached for Caleb's hand, and in that touch, Caleb found a truth stronger than pain. Love could rebuild what hate had broken. Caleb's apartment felt different that night, the familiar hum of Burlington streets outside doing little to calm the storm within him. He sat by his drafting table, pencil idle, the letter from Marcus tucked into a drawer he hadn't opened since. Jalen, sprawled on the couch with a sketch pad, glanced up, his eyes catching the tension in Caleb's jaw. "You're thinking about him again," Jalen said. Not a question but a quiet acknowledgement. Caleb nodded, his gaze fixed on a half-finished blueprint. "It's like he's in my head now, after all this time. I hate it." Jalen set his sketchpad aside and moved closer, his presence a steady anchor. "You don't have to decide anything tonight, or tomorrow. You get to choose what he means to you now." The words lingered as Caleb traced the lines of his design. A community center with ramps and wide doors, a testament to the life he'd carved out. He'd spent years proving he was more than his injury, more than his father's betrayal. Yet Marcus's apology, frail as it was, had cracked open a door Caleb thought he'd sealed shut. The next morning, Amara's coffee shop was a haven of warmth and chaos. The scent of fresh espresso mingled with the chatter of regulars, and Amara, her purple locks tied back, slid a latte toward Caleb with a knowing look. "So, how'd it go with the old man?" Caleb recounted the hospice visit, his voice low to avoid curious ears. Amara listened, her usual snark softened by concern. "You're stronger than I am, Cal. I'd have told him to rot." "Maybe I should've," Caleb admitted, stirring his latte. "But part of me wonders if he's really changed, or if I even care." Amara leaned across the counter, her eyes fierce. "You care because you're human, but don't let him make you feel small again." Her words stuck with Caleb as he and Jalen spent the week navigating their routines. Jalen's shifts at the hospital, Caleb's meetings with clients. But Marcus's shadow loomed. Another letter arrived, this one detailing memories of Caleb's childhood, moments Marcus cherished before their world fractured. It was a plea raw and desperate, for a second chance. Caleb read it alone, the words stirring a mix of anger and longing. On Saturday, Jalen suggested a drive to Shelburne Farms, a sprawling estate by Lake Champlain where they could escape the weight of decisions. The air was crisp, the fields golden under the October sun. They wandered the trails, Caleb's wheelchair gliding over the accessible paths, Jalen's laughter breaking the quiet as he recounted a patient's attempt to flirt with him mid-shift. For a moment, Caleb felt light, the burden of his father's remorse left behind. But reality intruded when Caleb's phone buzzed with a voicemail from the hospice. Marcus's condition was worsening. He might not have long. The message was a punch to the gut, forcing Caleb to confront the ticking clock. He looked at Jalen, who was sketching a barn in the distance, and felt a surge of gratitude. "I don't know what I'd do without you," Caleb said, his voice thick. Jalen's smile was soft, his hand finding Caleb's. "You'd be fine, but I'm glad I'm here." That night, Caleb dreamed of the night he was paralyzed. His father's shouts, the pain, the darkness. He woke gasping, Jalen's steady breathing beside him a reminder of the present. He couldn't keep running from this. He needed answers not just for Marcus but for himself. The second visit to the hospice was harder. Marcus looked frilier, his skin paper-thin, but his eyes held a stubborn spark. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I need you to know I see you now. The man you've become." Caleb's chest tightened. "You don't get to be proud of me. You lost that right." Marcus nodded, tears spilling. "I know, but I'm proud anyway." The words hit like a wave, stirring a mix of rage and sorrow. Caleb wanted to hate him, to walk away and never look back. But Jalen's hand on his arm, steady as ever, kept him grounded. They talked for an hour, Marcus recounting his regrets, Caleb sharing fragments of his life. His work, his dreams, his love for Jalen. It was raw, messy, and incomplete, but it was a start. As they left, Caleb felt lighter, not because he'd forgiven Marcus, but because he'd spoken his truth. Jalen drove them home, the radio playing softly, and Caleb realized something vital. His survival didn't depend on Marcus's approval. It never had. Winter crept into Burlington, dusting the city with snow and a quiet that mirrored Caleb's mood. He and Jalen spent evenings curled up in his apartment, the glow of a laptop screen illuminating their faces as they planned a trip to Montreal, a dream of cobblestone streets and new horizons. But Marcus's letters kept coming, each one a thread pulling at Caleb's resolve. They were filled with memories, apologies, and a plea for time Caleb wasn't sure he could give. One evening, as snow fell outside, Jalen found Caleb staring at the latest letter, his face a mask of conflict. "You're carrying him everywhere," Jalen said, his voice gentle but pointed. "It's okay to let go, you know?" Caleb's laugh was bitter. "Let go? He's dying, Jalen. And I'm still the kid waiting for him to love me." Jalen knelt beside him, his hands framing Caleb's face. "You're not that kid anymore. You're the man who built a life despite him. Don't forget that." The words were a lifeline, but Caleb's heart was a battlefield. He wanted to believe he could move forward without resolving the past, but Marcus's frailty haunted him. Amara, ever blunt, put it differently during a late-night coffee run. "He's not your responsibility, Cal. You don't owe him peace." Yet Caleb couldn't shake the need to understand why. Why had Marcus's love turned to violence? Why was he reaching out now? The questions drove him to the hospice again. This time alone, Jalen's shift at the hospital keeping him away. The drive was a blur of snow and doubt, the roads slick but passable. Marcus was weaker, his breath shallow, but his eyes lit up when Caleb entered. "You came," he whispered, a smile cracking his dry lips. I need to know why, Caleb said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. Why you couldn't accept me. Why you hurt me. Marcus's face crumpled, and for a moment, Caleb thought he wouldn't answer. Then, haltingly, Marcus spoke of his own father, a man who ruled with fear, who saw weakness in anything soft. I was raised to believe love had rules, Marcus said. When you told me, I panicked. I thought I was losing you. You did lose me, Caleb shot back. You broke me. Marcus nodded, tears streaming. I know, and I'll carry that to my grave. The confession didn't erase the pain, but it gave Caleb a piece of the puzzle. His father wasn't a monster, just a man trapped by his own fears. It didn't excuse the violence, but it humanized it. Caleb left the hospice with more questions than answers, but a weight had shifted. He wasn't seeking Marcus's love anymore. He was seeking his own peace. Back in Burlington, Jalen was waiting, his apartment a warm contrast to the cold outside. They cooked dinner together, Jalen's laughter filling the silence as he fumbled with a spatula. Caleb watched him, marveling at how love could be this simple, this safe. I think I'm done running from him, Caleb said, his voice soft. Jalen's eyes met his, warm and steady. Then you're braver than most. The weeks that followed were a delicate balance. Caleb visited Marcus twice more, each meeting a step toward understanding, if not forgiveness. Marcus shared stories of his own youth, of dreams he'd buried under duty. Caleb, in turn, spoke of his work, his advocacy, and the man he loved. It wasn't reconciliation, not fully, but it was a bridge, fragile but real. One night, as Caleb and Jalen walked by the lake, the snow crunching under Jalen's boots and Caleb's wheels, Caleb felt a clarity he hadn't known before. I don't need him to be my father anymore, he said. I need to let him go for me. Jalen stopped, his breath visible in the cold air. You're already whole, Caleb. You always were. The words settled deep, a truth Caleb was finally ready to embrace. Marcus's time was running out, but Caleb's life was his own. He'd survived not because of his father, but despite him. And with Jalen by his side, he knew he could face whatever came next. Spring arrived in Burlington, tentative and green, as if the city itself was waking from a long sleep. Caleb's work flourished, his designs for an accessible community center gaining traction with the city council. Jalen, now a constant in his life, brought a rhythm to Caleb's days. Morning coffee runs, late-night debates about art, and quiet moments where words weren't needed. But Marcus's declining health cast a shadow, a reminder that time was slipping away. The hospice called one April morning, their tone urgent. Marcus had days, maybe hours. Caleb sat with the news, his sketchpad forgotten on his lap. Jalen, just off a night shift, found him staring out the window, the lake shimmering beyond. You don't have to go, Jalen said, his voice a soft tether. I know, Caleb replied, but I think I need to. The drive to Montpelier was quiet, the radio off, the hum of the engine a steady pulse. Jalen drove, his hand occasionally brushing Caleb's, a silent promise. Caleb's mind churned with what he'd say, what he needed to hear. Forgiveness felt too big, too heavy, but closure was within reach. Marcus was a shadow of himself, his breath ragged, his eyes half closed. Caleb wheeled to his bedside, Jalen standing just outside the door. Dad, Caleb said, the word foreign on his tongue. I'm here. Marcus stirred, his gaze finding Caleb's. You're a better man than me, he whispered. I wish I'd seen it sooner. Caleb's throat burned. I needed you to love me. All of me. I do, Marcus said, his voice breaking. Too late, but I do. The words hung between them, fragile and true. Caleb didn't forgive, not fully, but he let go of the anger that had tethered him to that night 10 years ago. He spoke of his life, his love for Jalen, his dreams of a world built for everyone. Marcus listened, his eyes glistening, and for the first time, Caleb felt seen. They stayed until dusk, the room bathed in soft light. Marcus's breathing slowed, and Caleb knew this was goodbye. He squeezed his father's hand, a gesture of peace, not absolution. As they left, Jalen wrapped an arm around Caleb, his warmth a shield against the ache. Back in Burlington, life moved forward. Caleb threw himself into his work, his designs a testament to resilience. Amara, ever the skeptic, toasted to his strength at Brood Awakening, her smile proud. You faced the dragon, Cal. Not many do. Jalen and Caleb grew closer, their bond a quiet rebellion against the pain of the past. They planned their Montreal trip, dreaming of art galleries and cozy cafes. But the hospice called again a week later. Marcus was gone. The news was a quiet ache, not a storm. Caleb mourned the father he'd lost long before, but he also felt free. At Marcus's memorial, a small gathering in a Montpelier church, Caleb spoke. Not of forgiveness, but of survival. He made mistakes, Caleb said, his voice steady. But I chose to build something better. Jalen stood beside him, his presence a reminder of what love could be. As spring bloomed into summer, Caleb found peace in small moments. Jalen's laughter, Amara's sarcasm, the lines of a new blueprint. He wasn't defined by his father's actions, but by his own. And in that truth, he found a strength that no one could take away. Summer in Burlington was alive with color. Lake Champlain sparkled under the sun, and the streets buzzed with festivals and laughter. Caleb's community center project was approved, a victory that felt like a milestone in his journey. He and Jalen celebrated with a picnic by the lake, their blankets spread under a towering oak, the air thick with the scent of grass and possibility. Jalen sketched Caleb's profile as he spoke passionately about accessible design, his hands moving with the same fire that had drawn Jalen to him. You're changing the world, you know, Jalen said, his pencil pausing. One blueprint at a time. Caleb smiled, his heart full. I'm just trying to make it easier for the next person. The past year had been a crucible, forging Caleb into someone stronger. Not because of Marcus, but because of the choices he'd made. His father's death had closed a chapter, leaving behind a bittersweet peace. Caleb didn't forgive the violence, but he'd found a way to let it rest, to let it be a scar rather than a wound. Amara threw a party at Brood Awakening to celebrate the community center, the shop decked out in fairy lights and pride flags. Friends and clients filled the space, their laughter a chorus of support. Caleb wheeled through the crowd, Jalen's hand on his shoulder, and felt a gratitude that ran deeper than words. This was his family, chosen and fierce. As the night wound down, Caleb and Jalen slipped outside, the summer air warm against their skin. They sat by the lake, the water reflecting a sky full of stars. I used to think I needed him to be whole, Caleb said, his voice soft. But I was wrong. You, Amara, this life, I'm already whole. Jalen leaned in, his lips brushing Caleb's. You're more than whole. You're extraordinary. The kiss was a promise, a seal on the life they were building together. Caleb thought of the boy he'd been, scared and broken, and marveled at the man he'd become. His father's actions had shaped him, but they didn't define him. Love did, Jalen's, Amara's, his own. The community center opened that fall, its ramps and open spaces a testament to Caleb's vision. At the ribbon cutting, he spoke of resilience, of building a world where everyone belongs. Jalen stood in the crowd, his smile brighter than the autumn sun, and Caleb knew he'd found his home. Years later, as Caleb and Jalen walked through Montreal's old streets, hand in hand, Caleb thought of Marcus, not with anger, but with a quiet understanding. His father had been a man of flaws, of fear, but Caleb had chosen love over hate, creation over destruction. And in that choice, he'd found a life worth living. The lake stretched before them, endless and calm, a mirror of the peace Caleb carried within. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was thriving. And with Jalen by his side, the future was a canvas, ready for their next design.